When you look at yourself, what do you see? Maybe you see someone who's shy, who's not very confident. Maybe you see someone who just made so many past mistakes, or maybe you find yourself unattractive. Whatever your answer is, chances are those thoughts have influenced your life way more than you realize. The opportunities that we pursue and the risk we're willing to take, the relationships that we want to build aren't necessarily defined by our abilities, but how we view ourselves. Psychology has continuously shown that the way we view ourselves influences the way we behave. So if someone believes that they are incapable, they're not going to take any risks. If they feel they're unlikable, they're going to respond more to criticism and rejection. Eventually, the issue no longer becomes the experience, but the identity that we've built from it. As Christians, the only way for you to know who you truly are is to go back to the one who created you. Our past may influence how we see ourselves, but it does not have the final authority over ourselves and our future. So in this video, I want to point out 4 reasons why you might be stuck. And also I'm going to share with you how we can reshift our mind into thinking right about ourselves so we become unstuck. Hi everyone, welcome back to Mind and Bible, where we let God transform us by renewing our minds. Okay, so I'm going to explain how our brain creates our identity. And most people think that they consciously choose it, but in psychology, it's actually something that's built over time. Okay, so from childhood, our brain is constantly collecting information about ourselves, about the people around us, and the world around us. Every experience, every compliment, criticism, even successes and failures, those are messages that are being repeated, and they begin to form mental frameworks called schemas. Schema is simply a way that your brain organizes information so it can answer questions such as, who am I? Over time, these repeated experiences create a self-schema, or in other words, the lens in which you see yourself. So once these beliefs are established, your brain doesn't try to change them. Instead, it tries to protect them. So imagine someone grows up believing that they're ugly. And then years later, they get married to a spouse that every day compliments them. You might think that that compliment is going to change the way they view themselves, but it doesn't. Simply because they're trying to fit a new belief into an old pattern, an old way of thinking. Instead, they'll just respond with, oh, they're just biased. They're just lying to me. That's not really how they feel. Or imagine that someone believes that they're not intelligent and they get an A on an exam. Instead of thinking, wow, I'm actually really smart, they're going to say, oh, well, I was just lucky. Or like, wow, the test was just super easy. The identity or the framework stays the exact same. This is called assimilation. Instead of changing the framework, our minds squeeze new experiences into the identity that we already have. So changing the framework is actually a lot harder, and this would be called accommodation. Accommodation happens when we allow new information to reshape the way we see ourselves. So instead of saying, I just got lucky on that test, we begin saying, well, maybe I'm more capable than I thought. And the container itself changes. And this is where I think psychology and Christianity beautifully meet. So when Jesus says, you're a new creation, you're my workmanship, I've created you, you're a masterpiece. Many of us are still trying to fit those new truths into an old identity. Scripture isn't telling us to simply decorate an old identity with a bunch of Bible verses. It's saying, let God renew, reshape, and recreate that framework in your mind to the identity that Christ has for you. One of the most fascinating ideas about psychology is something called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias means that our brains naturally notice and remember information that supports things that we already believe. So if I believe that nobody likes me, I'm going to notice rejection and criticism a lot faster. And if I believe I'm a failure, I'm going to remember every mistake while overlooking any part of my success. So essentially, our minds become incredibly good at collecting evidence for things that we already believe. So what's fascinating is that we read in scripture, God approaches identity almost the complete opposite way. He doesn't wait for people to change before he starts speaking a new identity over them. He gives them a new identity first. So for example, when Gideon saw himself, he saw himself as a fearful man hiding from his enemies. And that's when God called him a mighty warrior. We read in Judges 6, verse 11, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." When Abraham had no children, God renamed him to Abraham, which means the father of many nations. And we read when Simon was inconsistent and impulsive, Jesus called him Peter, the rock. And again, God speaks to people who are becoming rather than what they currently believe themselves to be. One of my favorite observations in scripture is that God rarely introduces people to themselves the way that they view themselves. So how do we begin to change the way we see ourselves? So we might have heard this verse before, but it's so important in this context. So in 2 Corinthians 10:5, it says, "And we take captive every thought and make it obedience to Christ." So how are we taking thoughts captive? Well, when a thought comes into our mind, like I'm unsuccessful, what we need to do is find a Bible verse that counters that. So for example, if we're just constantly afraid to do something, to take a next step, it says in 2 Timothy 1:7, God has given us a power of love, self-control, and not fear. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking the old identity, the lie, and pairing it with God's truth, and then allowing that to reshape our minds. So if we do that every single time a thought enters our brain, what's going to happen is it's going to change us slowly. So for me personally, I'll do that for 3 weeks straight. And I don't know why it's 3 weeks, but it just simply is. And literally, my old way of thinking will automatically just completely start to change. The more that I counter the lies that come into my mind, what I've been believing, the more that I see God starting to change my life, then change my circumstances and change the way I view things. That is why it's so important that you must renew your mind. You must renew the old way of thinking, your old framework, and have God reshape that box to fit what is true, what is good, lovely, and pure. So ultimately, identity is a battle of authority. Are we going to allow our insecurities, our fears to dominate over us, or are we going to allow what God says about us to be true instead? Because if we believe that we're disqualified, we're going to live cautiously. If we believe that we are unwanted, we're going to expect rejection. But if we believe that we have power, if we believe that we are loved, that we are wanted, that God does see us and meet us exactly where we are, we're going to start to live out those truths, and then it'll be so much easier to live out the calling that God has for your life. Long before our lives change outwardly, our minds have to change first. That is all for today. Let me know what your favorite part of today's video was. If you struggle in any area, or if you have any other thoughts that you'd like to add to this, I'd love to hear them. So please let me know in the comments. And of course, I'll see you guys all in the next video. Until then, let God continue to renew your mind, transform you, and change you into a new person.